Studies have shown that personal relationships at work can create serious conflicts of interest. For Ethan, those statistics meant nothing until they became his reality. Ethan believed that hard work always paid off. For 3 years, he arrived before sunrise, stayed after everyone else had gone home, and never complained. While others chased attention, Ethan chased results. Every project he completed was another step toward the promotion he had dreamed about since joining the company. There was another reason he worked so hard. His girlfriend, Sophie, worked in the same company. When the company announced that a new regional operations manager would be promoted within the month, excitement spread through every department. Only one person would earn the position. The salary was nearly double. The benefits were life-changing. Whoever won the promotion would instantly become one of the company's youngest senior managers. Both Ethan and Sophie believed they had a chance. Instead of becoming rivals, they made a promise. "If one of us wins," Sophie said with a smile, "we both win." Ethan smiled back. Always, those words became their motivation. Every evening they stayed late together, preparing reports, improving presentations, and discussing new ideas that could impress management. They imagined celebrating the promotion together, no matter who received it. At least, that was the plan. Over the next few weeks, something slowly began to change. Sophie started volunteering for late meetings that Ethan wasn't invited to. She began receiving private messages that made her smile before quickly locking her phone whenever Ethan walked into the room. She suddenly became unusually close to their department director, the very man responsible for recommending the final candidate for promotion. At first, Ethan ignored the uneasy feeling growing inside him. As the promotion deadline drew closer, Ethan noticed something else. His own ideas he had shared only with Sophie were suddenly appearing during management meetings, presented by someone else. He couldn't explain it. Not yet. But deep inside, a single question refused to leave his mind. Was someone stealing more than just his chance at a promotion? Something had changed. Sophie wasn't the same woman he had fallen in love with. She used to wait for him after work so they could leave together. They would laugh about difficult clients, stop for dinner on the way home, and talk about the future. Those evenings had become their favorite routine. Now she always had an excuse. "I have one more report to finish. The director asked me to stay. I'll catch up with you later." At first, Ethan admired her dedication. After all, they were both chasing the same promotion. But then the late nights became almost every night. One evening, Ethan walked into the office cafeteria to surprise her with her favorite coffee. Before she noticed him, he saw something that made him pause. Sophie was laughing. Not with her coworkers. Not with friends. She was sitting across from Richard Harrison, the department director. Richard leaned forward as they talked, smiling in a way Ethan had never seen during business meetings. Sophie laughed again, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The moment she spotted Ethan, her smile disappeared. She stood up so quickly that she almost spilled her coffee. "Ethan, I wasn't expecting you." Richard calmly extended his hand. "We were just discussing tomorrow's presentation." Ethan forced a smile. Of course. But something about the conversation didn't feel professional. That night, another strange thing happened. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table. The screen lit up. Richard Harrison. Before Ethan could read another word, Sophie quickly grabbed the phone, turned it face down, and walked into the bathroom. She stayed inside for several minutes. When she came back, she acted as though nothing had happened. Ethan wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It fades one unanswered question at a time. Sometimes, the truth doesn't arrive with a loud warning. Sometimes, it appears on a phone screen and changes your life forever. The next morning, the office was busier than usual. Everyone was preparing for an important presentation to senior management. Employees hurried between meeting rooms, printers worked non-stop, and phones rang across every department. Ethan focused on finishing his report. Around lunchtime, Sophie rushed past his desk. "I forgot my phone," she said. "Can you grab it from the conference room? I'll meet you there." Without thinking twice, Ethan walked toward the empty conference room. Her phone was lying on the table beside her notebook. The screen suddenly lit up. A message appeared before it could lock. "Richard Harrison, last night was worth every risk. Don't worry. The promotion will be yours." Ethan froze. His heart pounded so hard he could barely breathe. For several seconds, he simply stared at the glowing screen, hoping he had misunderstood. Then another message appeared. "Just keep acting normal around Ethan until everything is official." The room felt strangely silent. His hands trembled as he slowly placed the phone back on the table. Before he could process what he had just seen, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ethan quickly stepped outside the conference room just as Sophie arrived. She smiled nervously. "Did you find it?" He forced himself to nod. "It's on the table." She thanked him without noticing the pain hidden behind his eyes. For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan couldn't focus. He replayed the messages over and over in his mind. But something still didn't add up. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, Ethan returned to the office to collect a folder he had forgotten. As he walked past Richard's office, he heard familiar laughter. The door wasn't fully closed. Through the narrow opening, Ethan saw Richard standing beside Sophie. They weren't discussing work. Richard gently held her hand. Then, without hesitation, he kissed her. In that single moment, every remaining doubt disappeared. The woman Ethan had trusted with his heart had chosen ambition over loyalty. But as painful as the truth was, Ethan made a silent promise to himself. He would not react in anger. He would not confront them without a plan. Because sometimes, the strongest response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's patience. After witnessing Sophie and Richard together, Ethan barely slept that night. Every memory they had shared now felt different. Every promise Sophie had made sounded empty. But by morning, he made a decision. He would go to work as if nothing had happened. If Sophie and Richard believed he knew nothing, they would eventually reveal even more. As Ethan walked into the office, he noticed something unusual. Employees were congratulating Richard Harrison. The presentation yesterday was incredible. That new operations strategy was brilliant. Corporate headquarters loved your ideas. Ethan stopped in his tracks. Those weren't Richard's ideas. They were his. Weeks earlier, Ethan had spent countless evenings researching market trends, building financial projections, and designing a strategy that could help the company expand into new regions. He had proudly shared every detail with Sophie, believing they were working as a team. Now Richard was being praised for work he had never created. Before Ethan could gather his thoughts, an email appeared in everyone's inbox. Subject: Leadership Recognition Meeting. Richard Harrison would be presenting the award-winning strategy to senior executives that afternoon. There was only one name attached to the project: Richard Harrison. Ethan's name was nowhere to be found. A painful truth hit him all at once. Sophie hadn't only betrayed his heart, she had betrayed his future. She had handed over months of his hard work to the very man she was secretly involved with. When the meeting ended, Sophie briefly glanced toward Ethan. For a split second, guilt flashed across her face. Then she looked away. That single glance confirmed everything. She knew exactly what she had done. Walking back to his office, Ethan felt something inside him change. The heartbreak was still there. But another feeling had taken its place. Determination. If Richard and Sophie believed they had already won, they were making the biggest mistake of their lives. Because Ethan had stopped thinking like a victim. He took a deep breath and made a choice that would change everything. Every morning, Ethan greeted Sophie with the same calm smile. He attended meetings with Richard without showing the slightest hint of suspicion. If either of them expected an emotional confrontation, it never came. That false sense of safety made them careless. Richard continued using Ethan's ideas during management meetings, believing no one would question him. Sophie became more confident, convinced that Ethan still trusted her completely. What neither of them realized was that Ethan had started paying attention to every detail. He saved project drafts with timestamps that clearly proved they were his original work. Every document became another piece of the puzzle. Instead of spending his evenings thinking about revenge, he invested in himself. For the first time in weeks, his focus shifted away from what had been stolen, and toward what no one could ever take from him: his knowledge, his discipline, his character. Slowly, something unexpected began to happen. People outside Richard's department started noticing Ethan's professionalism. Managers from other teams began asking for his opinion on difficult projects. One afternoon, Ethan received an unexpected email from someone at corporate headquarters. The sender was a senior executive he had never spoken to before. The message was short. "I'd like to discuss one of your recent project ideas. Please stop by my office tomorrow morning." Ethan stared at the screen. He hadn't submitted anything directly to corporate. So, how did they know his name? For the first time since discovering the betrayal, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. The next morning, Ethan arrived at work earlier than usual. He wasn't expecting good news. The pain of betrayal was still fresh, but he had made peace with one thing. He couldn't control what Richard and Sophie had done. He could only control what he did next. At exactly 9 o'clock, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was an email from corporate headquarters. "Mr. Carter, please report to Executive Conference Room B at 9:30 a.m. No explanation, no agenda, just a meeting request." As Ethan walked through the executive floor, he noticed something different. This area of the building was usually reserved for senior leadership. Employees from his department rarely had a reason to be there. A receptionist greeted him with a smile. "They're expecting you." Moments later, the conference room door opened. Standing inside was Victoria Reynolds, the company's senior vice president of operations. She had a reputation for being fair, direct, and impossible to impress. She shook Ethan's hand. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Carter." Ethan nodded politely. "I wasn't sure why I was invited." Victoria smiled. "That's exactly why I wanted to meet you." She placed a folder on the table. Inside were several project reports. His reports. "I've been reviewing your work for the past few months," she said. "The quality, the detail, and the way you solve problems caught my attention." Ethan looked surprised. "I didn't know anyone outside my department had seen them." "They weren't sent to me," Victoria replied. "I found them while reviewing archived project files." For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. Someone had finally recognized his work. Not because of office politics, not because of personal relationships, but because of its quality. Victoria leaned forward. "I'm leading a confidential expansion project for our company. It reports directly to corporate headquarters." She paused before continuing. "I want you on my team." Ethan blinked. "What about my department director?" A small smile crossed her face. "He won't be involved." Those 5 words changed everything. For the first time in weeks, Richard Harrison would have no control over Ethan's future. Victoria explained that only a handful of employees had been selected for the project. As Ethan accepted the folder, he felt something he hadn't experienced since before the betrayal. Confidence, he walked out of the executive office with a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Richard Harrison was making a dangerous mistake. Success had made him careless. He no longer bothered hiding how much attention he gave Sophie. They arrived at meetings together, disappeared behind closed office doors for long periods, and often left the building at the same time. People noticed. Within days, the rumors spread across departments. Employees became less interested in the promotion itself and more interested in how Sophie seemed so confident she had already won. Sophie noticed the attention, but convinced herself it didn't matter. Richard had promised her everything was under control. "The promotion is practically yours," he told her one evening inside his office. "Just trust me." Those words filled her with confidence. She had already started imagining her new office, her higher salary, and the respect that came with a leadership title. She believed the hardest part was over. As the gossip grew louder, Richard became increasingly desperate to protect his reputation. He started canceling meetings at the last minute. He instructed managers not to discuss promotion decisions with anyone. He even demanded that employees stop spreading distractions around the office. But every attempt to silence the rumors only made people more suspicious. One afternoon, Richard called Ethan into his office. His smile looked forced. "I've heard you've been spending time with executives from corporate headquarters." Ethan remained calm. "They've asked me to help on a special project." "Good, just remember where your loyalty belongs." "I've always been loyal," Ethan replied. "To the company." For the first time, Richard had no response. As Ethan walked out, Richard realized something he hadn't expected. He could no longer control Ethan. Later that evening, Sophie entered Richard's office, excited. "Have you heard anything about the promotion date?" Richard hesitated. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His confident expression disappeared. The message was from corporate compliance. "Mandatory meeting. Executive attendance required." Richard slowly lowered the phone. For the first time, fear replaced confidence. Outside his office, Ethan quietly walked past without even looking inside. He didn't know what the message said, but he could feel the atmosphere changing. The lies that had protected Richard and Sophie for so long were beginning to crack. And neither of them realized that the people asking questions already had more information than they thought. The truth wasn't knocking at the door anymore. It was about to walk straight in. Then, on Monday morning, an email landed in every employee's inbox. Subject: Internal Compliance Review. The company announced that an independent audit team from corporate headquarters would be conducting a full review of recent promotions, executive decisions, project approvals, and the use of company resources. The office fell silent. Nobody had expected an investigation. Richard read the email twice. His face lost its color. Across the room, Sophie quietly lowered her phone, her hands beginning to shake. Neither of them said a word. Throughout the day, members of the audit team interviewed employees one by one. They requested project files, meeting records, email histories, and approval documents. Nothing was overlooked. Ethan remained calm. When an investigator asked for copies of his previous work, he simply provided the organized files he had carefully preserved over the past several weeks. The investigators thanked him and moved on. Meanwhile, Richard grew increasingly desperate. Later that afternoon, Sophie approached Ethan near the break room. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely frightened. "Ethan," she said softly, "have you heard anything about this investigation?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Only what everyone else knows." She searched his face, hoping to find reassurance. Instead, she found something she hadn't seen before. Distance. Without another word, Ethan walked away. As the elevators closed behind him, he realized something important. He no longer needed to chase the truth. The truth was finally catching up with the people who had tried so hard to hide it. And before the investigation was over, one piece of evidence would change everything. The day finally arrived. The promotion everyone had been fighting for was only minutes away from being announced. Employees filled the company's main auditorium long before the meeting began. Excitement spread through every row as people quietly guessed who would walk away with the biggest opportunity of the year. Richard Harrison sat confidently in the front row. Sophie sat beside him, wearing a smile that suggested she already knew the outcome. Across the room, Ethan quietly took a seat near the back. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't thinking about winning anymore. He had already learned that success built on honesty lasts much longer than success built on deception. Victoria Reynolds walked onto the stage, followed by two members of the corporate audit team. The room became completely silent. She thanked everyone for their patience during the recent compliance review before getting straight to the point. Before today's promotion announcement, she began, "There is something important we must address." Richard's smile faded. Sophie slowly lowered her eyes. Victoria continued. "Our investigation uncovered serious violations involving project ownership, conflicts of interest, and failures to follow company policy." A large screen behind her displayed several project timelines. One by one, the documents revealed the truth. The strategy that had earned Richard so much praise had originally been created by Ethan Carter. A wave of whispers swept across the auditorium. Richard tried to interrupt. "There has to be some misunderstanding." Victoria calmly looked toward the audit team. "There isn't." The lead investigator confirmed that every document had been independently verified. The evidence spoke for itself. No one could argue with it. Richard slowly leaned back into his chair, speechless. Sophie looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath her. Victoria smiled gently before looking toward the audience. "There is one employee whose professionalism, honesty, and exceptional work stood out throughout this entire process." She paused. "Ethan Carter, would you please join us on stage?" The room erupted into applause. Ethan stood slowly, almost unable to believe what he was hearing. As he walked toward the stage, he wasn't thinking about revenge. He wasn't thinking about Richard or Sophie. He was thinking about one simple lesson. Integrity may not reward you immediately, but eventually, it speaks louder than any lie ever could. The applause from the promotion ceremony had barely faded when employees received another company-wide email. Everyone was instructed to return to the auditorium. No one knew why. The room quickly filled again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The excitement had been replaced by silence. People looked at one another, waiting for answers. Victoria Reynolds walked back onto the stage, joined by members of the corporate audit team. She spoke with calm confidence. "Our investigation has officially concluded." Every eye in the room turned toward the stage. She continued. "The review confirmed repeated violations of company policy, including conflicts of interest, misuse of leadership authority, misrepresentation of project ownership, and unethical conduct." Richard Harrison lowered his head. For the first time, the man who always appeared confident had nothing to say. Victoria looked directly at him. "Effective immediately, Richard Harrison's employment with this company is terminated." The room fell completely silent. Richard slowly stood from his seat. He glanced around the auditorium, searching for support. There was none. Without another word, he quietly walked toward the exit. The doors closed behind him. Just like that, years of influence disappeared. Victoria then addressed another difficult decision. "Our investigation also found that Sophie Mitchell knowingly participated in actions that violated company ethics and professional standards." Sophie's face filled with disbelief. She had convinced herself that everything would somehow work out. Instead, she heard the words she feared most. "The promotion process has been canceled for your application. You will also receive formal disciplinary action in accordance with company policy." Tears filled Sophie's eyes. It wasn't only the promotion she had lost, it was the trust of her coworkers. As employees slowly left the auditorium, many avoided looking at her altogether. Reputation takes years to build, but only moments to destroy. Across the room, Ethan remained quiet. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. Watching two people lose everything brought him no joy. Because real victory isn't seeing others fall. It's refusing to become like them. As Ethan walked toward the exit, Victoria caught up with him. You handled this with professionalism from beginning to end, she said. Ethan nodded gratefully. I just wanted the truth to matter. Victoria smiled. It did. As they shook hands, Ethan realized something powerful. His greatest achievement wasn't exposing the people who betrayed him. It was proving that integrity can survive even the deepest betrayal. But one final chapter still remained, a chapter neither Ethan nor Sophie could avoid. A few weeks after the investigation ended, life inside the company looked very different. Sophie's desk had been moved to another department where she quietly focused on rebuilding what was left of her career. One Monday morning, Ethan received another invitation from Victoria Reynolds. This time, there was no uncertainty, only opportunity. When he entered her office, she greeted him with a warm smile. Congratulations, Ethan, he looked puzzled. For what? Victoria slid a folder across the desk. Inside was an official offer. Leadership Development Manager. It wasn't the promotion Ethan had originally applied for. It was something even better. Victoria looked him in the eyes. We don't just reward results here. We reward character. For a moment, Ethan was speechless. Months earlier, he thought his career had been destroyed. Now, because he had stayed professional, protected the truth, and refused to let bitterness control him, doors were opening that he had never imagined. He accepted the offer with a grateful smile. His first weeks in the new role felt different from anything he had experienced before. People valued his ideas. His teammates respected his leadership. He started exercising again. He reconnected with old friends. He spent weekends with family instead of worrying about work. Little by little, the weight he had carried for so long disappeared. One evening, as he looked out over the Manhattan skyline from his office window, Ethan realized something. Losing Sophie had once felt like losing everything. Now he understood it had made room for something better. Not just a better career, a better life. And just when he believed the story was finally over, a familiar voice called his name from behind. Ethan slowly turned around. He never expected to see Sophie standing there. She looked different. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me. Ethan remained calm. I wasn't expecting you. She looked down before taking a slow breath. I owe you an apology. I betrayed your trust. I chose ambition over honesty. I convinced myself that success was worth any price. Her voice began to shake. I was wrong. Ethan listened without interrupting. There was a time when he had imagined this moment 100 different ways. He thought he would make her feel the same pain she had caused him. But standing there now, none of that mattered anymore. Sophie wiped away a tear. I know I can't change what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. For the first time, Ethan smiled. Not because he was happy she was hurting, but because he realized how far he had come. I've already forgiven you, he said quietly. But forgiveness doesn't always mean going back. Sophie nodded. She understood. Some bridges aren't destroyed by anger. They're destroyed by choices. She thanked him for listening and slowly walked toward the elevator. Months earlier, betrayal had nearly broken him. Instead, it had built a stronger version of the man he was meant to become. If this story reminds us of anything, it's this. Success gained through betrayal is temporary. Success built on integrity lasts. And in the end, neither Ethan nor Sophie expected that the greatest victory would have nothing to do with a promotion. It would be the person Ethan became after surviving the betrayal.